Hello and welcome to the Up Level Love podcast. I'm your host, Ashley J. And on this podcast, we discuss all things sex, love, and relationship to help you create next level love within yourself and your relationships. I'm a love and intimacy guide that specializes in groundbreaking embodiment work to take you from tapped out to turned on in life and the bedroom. In today's podcast, I'm going to share with you 5 female pleasure anatomy facts no one taught you. Yes, that's right. There are things that you probably don't know about the female body. Female pleasure is often a great mystery or can even feel hard to access for all sexes. In my opinion, a big reason for this is that we have been miseducated and misinformed. So we don't often know how much pleasure is actually available to the female body. We are told this narrative that men are more sexual than women, and women often don't want as much sex, which can play a detrimental role in the struggles many couples face. This is a big reason why I'm sharing this information, because I believe that once women know what is available to them and are able to access that, then their drive will go up and they'll feel more health and vitality in their lives. A woman's body is literally designed to feel far more pleasure and has more orgasmic potential than a man's body. So in this podcast, I'm going to debunk the twisted narrative and unlock the mysteries of female pleasure by giving you 5 female pleasure facts that no one taught you. So if you are a man listening to this podcast, you will gain just as much valuable insight as a woman. In fact, it's just as important that you know these facts as your partner. So, why has female pleasure been so hidden from us? I believe it's a lack of accurate information. Science didn't even begin to study female pleasure outside of reproduction until the late 1980s or 1990s. The true layout of the clitoris wasn't mapped out and really fully understood until 2006. Almost all scientific research and studies were done by men on men until more recently, and that research was only focused on reproduction. So we are way behind in understanding our pleasure, and generally, we are way under pleasured. There are many layers to female pleasure that make it accessible or not. While it's important to understand the technical aspects of the female body, it is just as important to understand the emotional, mental, and energetic elements that are part of her experience and influence her pleasure. But just know that physical skill go hand in hand with connection, safety, healing trauma, your emotional state, and so much more. We are complex beings with a universe of sensation available within us. I want you to know your pleasure and have it fuel your health, happiness, and wholeness. So if you're ready to unleash the wild woman within or your partner, and want to feel the abundant orgasmic potential possible to the female body, then you're going to want to hear the rest of this podcast. So let's dive right in. And the first female pleasure anatomy secret I'm going to share with you is that most women are having penetrative sex way before their bodies are actually ready for it. And this can lessen the pleasure available and dampen orgasmic potential and can even cause some physical harm, which I will go into in a bit. So this is so important to know. The fact that most women don't orgasm during penetration doesn't mean that they can't. It just means that their body is usually not primed and ready for penetration. So the orgasm potential isn't there. Also, understanding the internal landscape and the different points that are available for orgasm and how to access those during penetration is super important, and why so many women don't actually experience the level of pleasure that they want to and their partners want to when they are in penetrative sex. Number 2, the clitoris is like a small penis and is made up of erectile tissue, just like a penis. The majority of your clitoris is internal, and the bulbs of the clitoris wrap around the walls of the vagina and play a starring role in pleasure and orgasm. When you get aroused, they fill with blood and change the texture and sensation of the vaginal wall, enhancing orgasmic potential. So if this hasn't gotten a chance to engorge and do its job and change all this, then you're not going to be able to feel and achieve orgasm. The head of the glands of the clitoris, the tip where we usually access it externally, also engorges when it is aroused. It gets bigger and it lifts upward as the arousal happens. So when we grind our pelvis on a solid surface or a body part, the bulbs of the clitoris get stimulated and begin to engorge. And this is an important factor in the female body being ready for penetration. So let's take the shame out of grinding and grind away. It's an important and necessary for your health and sexual satisfaction. Understanding the clitoris and how to interact with it, both externally and internally, takes time to understand. And while every clitoris is unique, we often tend to be too abrupt, hard, and don't take the time to truly activate this important pleasure organ. So get to know your clitoris inside and out and understand how complex and connected it is to your pleasure. Okay, the third fact. This is all about the G-spot, understanding the G-spot and the urethra sponge. What is the urethra sponge, you might ask? So the urethra sponge goes hand in hand and is literally the G-spot. So the urethra sponge is a sponge-like material that wraps around close to the opening of the urethra where urine comes out in the female body. And it sits below the clitoral glands and above the vaginal opening. And what this does is it fills with fluid when the female body gets aroused, and it squeezes off the urethra, which is super important because this squeezing off keeps bacteria from going up the urethra and causing urinary tract infections. So if you are someone who gets urinary tract infections, I would give your body a lot more time for turn on and learn how to activate and turn on your body more so that the urethra sponge does its job and can activate and fill with fluid. Now, this activation of the urethra sponge feels really good when it's in turn on to get stimulated from inside the vagina. And this is usually quite shallow, just like a knuckle or two if the fingers are accessing it inside the vagina. And this is your G-spot. So that's what makes it kind of elusive. The G-spot isn't always active. If you go internal when a woman isn't in her turn on and you're trying to locate and access and activate the G-spot, she won't have as much sensation and pleasure there as she will when she's in turn on. And this can discourage people. They can be like, well, I don't really know where it is, or my G-spot isn't really, doesn't really do much for me, because they're often trying to access it before she's had enough pleasure to feel that activation of that urethra sponge. And the way to find the G-spot is to use your fingers. Okay. It's important that men, women, all sexes do this if they're engaging with female bodies, to know where this area is. And usually it is just a finger or two. It's on the upper side of the vaginal canal. It is just a knuckle or two deep. And if you feel up on the inside of the vagina, you're going to feel where it's a little bit more ribbed on the surface, on the upper surface of the vagina than the rest of the vagina. So when you feel that area that feels more ribbed, that is the general area of the G-spot. And you want to explore this in a way that can feel good when she's in full turn on. And you want to do it in many different ways. You can do it lightly, you can do it more vigorously. You're going to listen to her and get to know her G-spot. This is such an important part of a woman's pleasure, and most men and women don't know how to access it. So I am giving you a valuable tip here on how to find it and when to find it. Full pleasure, full turn on to be able to explore this. When there is stimulation and arousal of the urethra sponge or the G-spot, fluid can transfer through the membranes of the Skene's glands, resulting in a very unique form of lubrication, female ejaculate. This can occur with very pleasurable peak feelings of orgasm, but not necessarily always with orgasm. You can still experience this lubrication, what's called squirting, even when you're not in orgasm, and it can feel incredibly good. So I believe that all women can access this. We just need to know how. And this is a tip for you to learn how to access this very important part of female pleasure. Number 4, the perineal sponge, which is in the wall between the vagina and the rectum, plays its part in sensation and arousal. Yeah, not a lot of people talk about this, but this is an incredibly sensitive and beautifully pleasurable part of female anatomy. And a great way to bring more blood flow and therefore arousal into the vagina is to stretch this area back towards the anus and hold while breathing deeply. When engorged with arousal and massage, this area can even lead to orgasm. So you want to do this in connection, you want to do this in communication to explore this part of the female anatomy and see what pleasure can be accessed through the perineal sponge. Number 5 is the orgasmic pleasure of the cervix. Many of us might be daunted by the cervix and see it as an organ that's only related to pregnancy, but it holds so much pleasure potential. The cervix is essentially the mouth of the uterus and plays an important role in pleasure. So by touching the cervix, we can activate the pelvic nerve that's responsible for sensations in the uterus, cervix, and mid-upper vagina, and can result in these deeper, really amazingly profound cervical orgasms. And sadly enough, most women haven't even touched their cervix. So this is an important thing to know, that there is so much pleasure and sensation available in your cervix. Once again, you only want to start to access and explore the cervix when you are in full turn on. And you can access it with fingers, you can access it with a dildo, you can access it with a penis. And it's all about angle and finding where it is. But I would highly recommend, if this isn't an area that you have explored, to do it with your fingers first, to be very mindful of it. It can be quite sensitive, and it can also take a lot of sensation and pressure, just depending on the person. So exploring the cervix and the orgasmic potential there can be absolutely delicious. So I want to share one more fact with you called the CUV complex. And this describes the interconnected structures of the clitoris, urethral sponge, and vagina. So I've just talked about all these different things, but not only do these structures influence each other with pleasure signals through a shared network of nerves, they also affect how each structure swells in response to stimulation. And we tend to focus on individual aspects of our genitalia and think of them in isolation. But the truth is, it's really rare that only one aspect is being stimulated thanks to this complex. And together, the clitoris, urethral sponge, and the vaginal wall all play a starring role in arousal of the vulva. So they're all so interconnected, and there is so much pleasure potential. I'm just sharing 5 facts with you. There are so many more. So now that I've shared this, the female body is a universe of pleasure to explore and discover. I wish you all so much fun and patience and tenderness as you explore this territory, and know that there is so much held in the pleasure anatomy, and there's often tension and trauma there. So be mindful, be kind, be patient, be loving with your bodies as you explore all of this new territory. And I have a specialty in female sexuality. It is incredibly sensitive because there are so many layers that go alongside of it. I'm sharing these technical anatomy aspects of pleasure. But as I said in the beginning, there's so much related to what we've experienced in our life, if we're holding any trauma, tension, our belief systems, any shame, religious dogma. Any of these pieces play a role in us being able to access or what is diminished in our pleasure potential. So please be mindful of all of this as you explore. And lastly, for the women, I'm so passionate about working with women so that they know this important aspect of themselves and how it is related and connected to the confidence they feel within themselves, within their bodies, that I have developed programs for women in this way and an in-person retreat. My in-person retreat is coming up soon, as is my next program. So if there is interest for you in this way, reach out to me on my website or via email, and I will get back to you with all of that information. My mission is to serve you women in knowing the epicness you hold inside of your body. Thank you, everyone, for listening to the Uplevel Up podcast. Please like and share it to those who need this information. Subscribe, and I look forward to sharing more soon.